The Bible tells us that from the time of Moses, several centuries before, the Jews were monotheistic, worshipping only one God. The Israelites in both the northern and the southern kingdom did share a common religion, but it wasn't monotheism.
We know from text and from archaeology that traditional Israelite religion involved venerating the ancestors, the gods of the underworld, so to speak. We know from texts, at least, and from iconography that we find in the ground, that traditional Israelite religion involved venerating the stars and the planets. We know, therefore, that traditional Israelite religion was polytheistic.
We know that in the Canaanite and Israelite tradition, mountains were very important in the cult. There were gods who are related to mountains. Baal, the Baal of Carmel, the Baal of Hermon, the Baal of Tzafon, and so on. And perhaps this tradition was transferred to the Israelites, to these early, very early Israelites. The bull is also the symbol, of course, of Baal, the god, the main god of Canaan, and also of El, the chief god, the chief god of the Canaanite pantheon. But also is related to the Israelite gods, especially in the northern part of the country, the golden calves. They are the major symbols during the Israelite period. There is a lot of continuity between Canaanite and Israelite religion.
But there was one quite extraordinary cultural difference between the Israelites and their neighbors.
There are no bones of pigs in the Iron One sides of the highlands. The question is why? After all, there's no problem to raise pigs in the highlands. In the Bronze Age, they did have pigs in the highlands. So it has nothing to do with the environment or something like that. There are several reasons, possible reasons. One is that if these people came from pastoral background, of course, the pastoral people do not have pigs, and this could have been one of the reasons. But I think that there is a stronger reason to the fact that there are no bones of pigs in the highlands, and that is that at the same time exactly you have the sites of the Philistines in the lowlands, and in general the sites in the lowlands, Canaanites, Philistines and others, they eat a lot of pork. So the distinction between the people of the lowlands and the people of the highlands could have been a situation of we and they. They eat pork, we don't. This is how we form our identity. This could have been the reason.
Whatever the reason, the Jewish prohibition on eating pork continues a tradition which goes back 3,000 years to the highlands of Canaan. As time passed, the southern kingdom of Judah slowly became more densely populated, and agricultural development slowly increased. By the 8th century BC, Judah, like Israel in the north, was also becoming a developed state with all the panoply of administration and bureaucracy. Literacy was the vital precondition, and pottery remnants of the period testify to this key development.
The one that I have in my hands is the typical Judahite seal impression. It has an emblem, apparently the emblem of the kingdom, the emblem of the king in the center. And then it says, belonging to the king, Hebron. It doesn't mean that the king was sitting in Hebron. It means that either the tax was collected there at Hebron, or that the vessels were produced there, the standardized vessels of the kingdom.
The development of Judah was extremely fortunate, for just as it was becoming a proper state, Israel in the north was facing a mortal threat.
After the 9th century, the period of greatness of the Kingdom of Israel, in the 8th century, decline sets in because of the pressure from the north. The Arameans, the Assyrians move down. Eventually, in 732, they take the Galilee, and that's the beginning of the end of the Kingdom of Israel.
One by one, the northern cities were overrun, and bit by bit, the kingdom expired. Thus ended a state called Israel. It it was to be 2,700 years before another state bearing that name would arise again in the Middle East. But Judah survived. According to the archaeology, large numbers of people now began arriving in the Judahite capital, Jerusalem. About 10,000 people suddenly descended on the city in the late 8th century. They were almost certainly the people of Israel.
Judah of the late 8th century was not at all similar to Judah of 30 or 40 years before. And that was because of the torrent of refugees who came from the north after the destruction of the northern kingdom of Israel by the Assyrians, came to Judah and settled here. Judah was completely transformed from a small, sleepy kingdom to one of the most influential kingdoms in the Levant. And that is the first time that we see a real, full-blown state in Judah.
These are the ruins of Lachish, Judah's second city. In 701 BC, after overrunning the northern kingdom of Israel, the Assyrians came south and began to attack Judah, then ruled by an important king called Hezekiah. As both the Bible and Assyrian records testify, the Assyrians razed the city to the ground after a prolonged siege.
Lachish was built probably in the 9th century. We don't have inscriptions, so we don't have a date. As a fortress city, it became the second important city of the kingdom of Judah after Jerusalem. This palace stood in the center of the site, and it was surrounded by very massive city walls and very massive city gate where we are standing now, and it became the most important fort in Judah after, of course, Jerusalem.
Now, in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, did Sennacherib, king of Assyria, come up against all the fenced cities of Judah and took them.
The attack on Judah is well documented in this Assyrian relief, which records the assault on Lachish. It shows the use of a specially constructed rampart, which is still visible today.
The Assyrians came here and they wanted to force their way through the wall, which was high up on the slope. So the system was very simple. They dumped here stones, natural stones, which they took from all over the fields. Then they covered it with cement because soldiers cannot walk on stones. And on top of it, they built a platform of earth on which the battering rams stood and from which they could attack directly the wall, and they could climb the wall and go inside.
The Assyrian attacks put considerable pressure on the Judahite capital, Jerusalem. Added to the refugees from the north, people from the surrounding countryside also fled there for protection. In ancient times, people had come here to draw water from deep underground. But because of the terrain, the thousands now living in the city couldn't all get access.
We are now at the spring of Gihon, the source which comes out here from a crack in the rock and is emanating all the year round. This is a permanent source of water, and this is the raison d'être of this village, which turned later, much later, into a city. Wouldn't it be for the water, nobody would have come to this place.
But we know, we understand, I think, the broader situation here. In the time of Hezekiah, Jerusalem grew all of a sudden and became a huge city, 10 times bigger than 50 years before him.
To bring water to the new population of the extended city, King Hezekiah now embarked on an extraordinary project, tunneling through 1/2 kilometer of rock.
The tunnel goes from here for over 500 meters, cut from both sides. They met in the middle, all in the rock.
Well, this is a real engineering achievement And we still don't have an adequate explanation how this was done.
So the building of the tunnel, which came out here, also shows the increasing sophistication of the kingdom, emphasized by the fact that Hezekiah chose to record his feat for posterity.
This ancient Hebrew inscription is really one of the most important pieces of evidence we have for the rise of Judah as a kingdom. It's dated to the time of King Hezekiah at the end of the 8th century BC, and it records the cutting of the long, complicated Siloam tunnel that brought water to the city. So it represents both the engineering that was possible by the kingdom and also the attempt of the kingdom to record that act in an official way, in an official inscription. And so this really brings us to a time when the kingdom was centralized, when Jerusalem was a city that was administered by royal officials that had the power and the level of literacy to record their achievements and their history.